Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I begin part one of two of my ranking of every Nero Wolfe novel written by Rex Stout. This video will feature the bottom half of the list, and I will say I was pleasantly surprised at how well these books held up. They couldn't be more different, but when I always think of Nero Wolfe, I sort of associate him with Philo Vance, and those Philo Vance novels did not hold up well at all. But Nero Wolfe did, which is probably why I think Nero Wolfe is still celebrated today. These stories are all very good, even like the flawed ones. There is not a single like complete dud in this collection. Now some are much better than others, but there is no flop here. And my appreciation for Rex Stout grew so much more on my reread. Stout is an author who was very open about his writing process. He gave a lot of interviews, and there's a lot of scholarly work on his writing. He's up there with the likes of like Christie and Doyle and even Poe with just how much has been written about him from an academic point of view. There are a lot of rankings of his work, and my rankings vary quite a bit actually from most of the lists I saw, with some notable exceptions. But I don't feel as if these books have a clear order. I mean, to me, many of them are very close together, especially like in the middle part of the list. And I think what Stout does so well is remain consistent in his style and in his writing and in his storytelling. And it might sound odd because Stout was pretty open about how much he just didn't care about continuity between books, even to the point where things like Wolfe's famous brownstone address is constantly changing, and like characters like basic personal backstories change, but the characters are so good. From our hero Nero Wolfe, our rotund, corpulent, lazy detective. It's actually inspirational just how lazy and greedy Wolfe is. I aspire to be that lazy yet still as successful as he is. And we have many consider the true hero of these books, our first person narrator, Archie Goodwin, who I think is the greatest detective sidekick of all time. Just ignore what I said in my video where I ranked the top 10 literary detective sidekicks. Archie should have been number one. I don't know what I was thinking with that. He's our blue collar, milk drinking, sarcastic Casanova and the man of action. And we have the likes of other recurring characters like Fritz and Theodore Hortzman and the gang of the Three Tiers of Ori Cather, Fred Durkin, Saul Panzer, who do a lot of the legwork because Nero Wolfe never leaves his house for business purposes. And there will not be many spoilers in this video, but I will warn you if one is coming, so you could skip ahead. You can use the chapter headings in the description to skip over any book you may want to. And this list only includes Nero Wolfe novels, not any short stories, none of the novellas, and none of Rex Stout's other non-Wolfe mysteries. And before I begin, make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel. As always, I will start at the bottom at number 33. The worst Nero Wolfe novel isn't actually that bad. This is probably the new best of the worst novels for me here, but I have In the Best Families, also called Even in the Best Families. And what places this one last isn't even the mystery, it's all the Arnold Zek stuff. This is the last of three Arnold Zek novels. With Arnold Zek is basically Wolfe's Professor Moriarty, this like arch nemesis, and I just hate all of this Arnold Zek stuff. It feels so forced in there and doesn't even play like that big of a role in the overall plot of the books. He basically just like threatens Wolfe on the phone a lot, usually because one of Zek's underlings has committed a murder related to like Wolfe's client or a potential client. And this is the conclusion of the Arnold Zek trilogy, which ends in a just really bizarre way. It almost becomes like a thriller esque. It's actually like very Sherlock Holmes, but it doesn't fit for Nero Wolfe. And Wolfe acts so bizarrely in this one. Without getting into it too much, Wolfe is basically a completely different person here, and even disappears for a long stretch of time. And Archie starts his own detective agency and is hired by Zek. This book just doesn't feel like a Nero Wolfe, with our main sleuth acting so uncharacteristically. Now, there are other books where Wolfe does similar things, not as egregious as this, but the motivation for him is a lot stronger. This book isn't totally bizarre. There are a lot of traditional things we see in Nero Wolfe. Archie winds up in jail again because Inspector Kramer, the recurring police detective who hates Wolfe and Archie, just like doesn't trust him. And the murder plot, which is barely important, involves the murder of a woman and her dog. And this is really sort of like an afterthought in this novel. I also didn't find the motive particularly compelling. The book is readable, however, which I can't say for the bottom ranked books of other lists, that this book is heavily flawed. So, In the Best of Families comes in here at number 33. At number 32, another Arnold Zek novel, The Second Confession, which is the second in the Triple Zek series. And overall, this book has a lot of the same problems In the Best Families does, but I think the mystery overall is just much stronger, and the Arnold Zek stuff, while still annoying and unnecessary, casts less of a shadow over the plot. Wolfe's client this time is James Sperling, who wants Wolfe to investigate his potential future son-in-law, whom is a suspected communist and later the murder victim. Communism is a theme we see a lot of in Nero Wolfe novels because Rex Stout was heavily targeted by the FBI and the House of Un-American Activities for being a suspected communist, which is just ridiculous when you look back. There are better novels to discuss this, which I will do when I get there. Again, we have Archie being accused of the murder at one point because Kramer is an idiot, and there's a lot of interesting political commentary here, with Wolfe also having another rival in the form of conservative radio host who is big on the Red Scare stuff. I think for me, The Second Confession is just stronger overall than In the Best of Families, but what specifically puts it above that one is this scene where Arnold Zek and his men shoot up and destroy Wolfe's orchid room. Wolfe was obsessed with orchids, and while this is a little cartoonish, Arnold Zek reminds me a lot of like Boris and Natasha from Rocky and Bullwinkle as these like cartoonish gangster like figures. I do think this scene is a lot of fun. Wolfe is just so distraught at losing his precious flowers, and he barely pays attention to Theodore Hortzman, his orchid man, who was almost murdered, and Wolfe only begins to care about Theodore because he takes such good care of the orchids. That moment is very Nero Wolfe, so I have The Second Confession here at number 32. At number 31 is not the other Arnold Zek novel that's coming a little later, but instead I have The Black Mountain. And I know people love this book, and I appreciate it from the emotional standpoint and from what this book does. But this book is just so not Nero Wolfe. I mean, the victim, one of them at least, is Marco Vukcik, who is Wolfe's restaurateur friend and a semi-recurring character. Rex Stout was not hesitant to kill off recurring characters or use them in like different ways. Marco has been working with Wolfe's estranged daughter Carla regarding independence of his and Wolfe's home country of Montenegro, which was then part of Yugoslavia. And there's a lot of like political and historical background given, which, it's not the most interesting thing, but it is necessary to fully understand the plot and appreciate it. Wolfe and Archie travel to Montenegro to investigate, especially when Carla also disappears. And like I referenced earlier, the motivation for Wolfe to take this uncharacteristic trip is much stronger in this book. However, this is still such a weird one for Wolfe. He's climbing up mountains and like getting into international shoot-offs with Russians and like just a whole bunch of just really odd things. And while a number of Wolfe novels do have like political intrigue, that political intrigue is just usually more domestic and more familiar to American readers, since these are American set novels, but just more accessible in ways I think most readers would care about. And perhaps because nowadays we do have like an independent Montenegro, and the former Yugoslavia just doesn't have a lot of lasting impact in people's minds, that this plot just isn't as salient to me. Now, I do think the book is well executed. Rex Stout does an excellent job in writing the plot and depicting the emotions he sets out to do. This book is a success on that front, but this is just like not one of my personal favorites at all. I don't particularly like it, and it doesn't even have like a lasting impact for the series. It just doesn't really like get brought up much in future novels or play a factor at all, and there's also a lack of, I think, character moments from more of the entertaining aspects. So there is this one scene where they're at the airport, and Archie always has to get his digs in at Nero Wolfe, even in a moment like this where he details this like female passenger who is complaining about having been overcharged for her overweight luggage, and then she just looks at Wolfe and wonders why he's so fat he has to weigh more than her luggage. It's just little things like that, but it does lack a bit, I think, in more character, especially from Archie. So I have The Black Mountain here at number 31. At number 30, I have a novel that I often see near the top of Nero Wolfe rankings, and I strongly disagree, but that is Too Many Clients. And Well, Archie has too many clients here, but the main case is that of Mr. Yeager, who is suspicious of people following him, and this leads to all these other people hiring Archie and Wolf for their services. Wolf is not really evolved here initially, and I think Too Many Clients is probably the worst written Wolf novel. There's something just so off with this book that I can never figure out what it is. Not when I first read it, and not now. I can't quite put my finger on it, but Archie's narrative voice in this is very strange to me. Sometimes he's talking directly to the reader using words like you and you readers out there, and this is not something he does often in other books. I can think of one or two other instances, but this book is throughout the whole novel. And at one point he says something like, "Oh, you'll meet Fred Durkin later on," and it's like this. What do you mean we meet Fred Durkin? This is book 20 something. We know who Fred Durkin is. He's either in or mentioned in every novel. And the writing was just so off here. And the plot is fine. There's nothing wrong with the plot. I don't think it's the greatest in the world, but it's far from the worst. I do think this is probably one of the more obvious culprits in a Nero Wolfe. Usually Rex Stout conceals the murderer very well, but that's not the case here. There's also an issue of fair play, and I know some people say it doesn't violate fair play rules, because if another character withholds information and not the first person narrator, with that being Archie, but Wolfe withholds information from Archie in this book. And while Archie isn't withholding it from the reader, it functions in the same way, especially since this is not something Wolfe does a lot. I think there's an argument for Too Many Clients to be even lower, but I did admittedly hesitate because it is so well regarded by Rex Stout scholars, so I landed it here, still very near the bottom at number 30. At number 29 is a book I really wanted to place higher, but the more I thought about it, the more I just couldn't for a few reasons, and that is another Too Many titled book, Too Many Cooks. And again, this is another one that is typically very high on rankings lists, and I wish I could put it higher. Wolfe leaves his home in this book to travel by train to West Virginia, but fear not, it's not for work purposes. And the beginning of this book is just a lot of fun with Archie, mocking Wolfe, who is petrified of being on this train as they head down south to meet this meeting of great chefs and sample all these different foods. And naturally, someone turns up murdered, turning this into a busman's holiday for Wolfe and Archie. I think the plot is pretty solid, especially earlier on, and there's a lot of fun tricks and clues and all that. So why is this one so low? Well, this book has not aged particularly well. The N-word is used very liberally. Now, it's not used by Wolfe or Archie. Wolfe is actually extremely progressive toward the African-American men in this book, who are all waiters. And while he does push for racial equality, remember this book was published in 1938. He's sort of praising their waiting skills and how good they are as waiters, which is very important to Wolfe. He values that in a person really above most other things. But, I think when you read this book in 2024, it takes on a slightly different connotation than what it's supposed to. And Archie, while avoiding the absolute worst of it, does not have very great opinions on African Americans, believing them to be inferior. And this is an opinion that changes in future novels, thankfully, but here, it's not great. And yeah, a man like Archie with his background and his personality would have these views in 1938. I can't fault for inaccuracy, but Archie is a beloved main character, so it stings. And the characters who do use the N-word are basically straw man arguments. Wolfe shuts them down, Rex Stout shuts them down, but it is used a lot, way too many times for comfort. It's not once or twice. And most troubling for me, and I am going to spoil the solution here a little bit. I'm not going to reveal who did it, but skip ahead if you want to. The most troubling for me is the racial dynamics are worked into the plot in a very unsavory and quite frankly unbelievable way. The murderer is a white man who disguises himself amongst the black waitstaff by donning blackface, and apparently not a single white person noticed this, which is really disturbing. The waiters did notice this, thankfully, but they didn't say anything because of the racial tensions between them and the white sheriff, and that makes sense. But it doesn't make any sense to me how any white person didn't notice this. And it had to be pretty obvious. And to be fair, the murderer did try to avoid the white diners and was playing off the trope that no one recognizes the wait staff. I guess. I don't think it quite works. I think this murder plot has a lot of holes in it, and it's just icky in the way it was presented. I wanted to put this book higher because there are fun moments, and there are good character moments, and there are good tricks and clues and all that, but, the racial content here was just too much to overlook, so it comes in at number 29. At number 28 is a novel that's just fine, and that is The Final Deduction. And this one primarily involves a kidnapping, which Wolfe takes credit for resolving, only for a few people involved in it, including the rescued hostage, to be murdered. Overall, I find this one just unremarkable. I mean, there's nothing like truly wrong with it, but nothing that stands out either. So I put it above those heavily flawed novels. I find the solution here to be extremely obvious from the get-go. And while the investigation and journey there isn't the worst, it's not exciting, mainly because I'm able to figure it out pretty early on, even before anything dramatic happened. And this is one of the lesser regarded Nero Wolfe novels. Not a lot of positive reviews for this book, but it's not atrocious. It's fine. It's readable. I don't have much to say about The Final Deduction. I guess the best part is reading Wolfe get his fee, which is usually the best part of these books. The way he tricks his clients into paying these exorbitant amounts of money for his services when he does very little actual work to earn it. It's always a delight. But I have The Final Deduction here at number 28. At number 27 is the sequel to Too Many Cooks, A Right to Die. And I'll just start this discussion off with a very weird circumstance that happens in this book that I do not hold against it. A Right to Die was published in 1964 and is a sequel to Too Many Cooks from 1938. Archie and Wolfe did not age at all in those 26 years. However, Paul Whipple, who was one of the black waiters in Too Many Cooks, did age 26 years, and they keep referring to events that happened in 1938 without any awareness as to this lack of continuity, which is just so typical for Rex Stout not to care about this at all. But Paul Whipple sought out Wolfe, who remembered him and helped him in Too Many Cooks, because he was concerned that his son is marrying a white woman, and he wants Wolfe to investigate her. It's not so much that this woman is white, although that is a factor. It's that Paul is suspicious that a white woman like Susan Brooke would want to marry a man like Paul's son Dunbar. And this book was written in the midst of the civil rights era of the 1960s, and it reflects that. I think Stout does such a good job of depicting all of these different sides views, but never giving into the idea that civil rights are not needed or that progress isn't necessary or unachievable. There are uncomfortable discussions, but always in the context of a discussion, and I think that they depict accurate beliefs people had in this time in a more positive manner than what was going on in Too Many Cooks. I wasn't bothered by that here. And Archie's views have evolved. Stout didn't just change Archie's views by retconning them. He evolved them, which was nice to see. Although, of course, the sarcastic Archie does have to make, inappropriate jokes about race, including one about how he didn't realize equal rights meant the equal ability to hire a private detective. But, overall, Archie is much, much better here. Now, the mystery itself is a bit of a mixed bag. Archie does a lot of traveling, which, does happen in other novels, but I've never been a big fan of that. And I felt here it was just way too much. And also, the big clue is something that is extremely clever, but no one is ever going to solve it. It's so clever, it's actually obscure that it's just who was going to think of that? But this book is very politically charged, like many Wolfe novels, but I think that it might just not be on topic for a lot of readers. I don't know how many readers want to rehash this. I personally don't mind, but I do understand some readers wanting to avoid these topics if they read for escapism. A Right to Die is a fine book, but it comes in here at number 27. At number 26 is a novel that has a lot of uncharacteristic stuff going on, but is otherwise a good novel, The Mother Hunt. And the client here is Lucy Valden, who is a widow who was suddenly left a baby on her doorstep with a note claiming the baby is the son of Lucy's late husband. And Lucy hires Wolfe to find the mother of this baby when there are virtually no clues. The hunt begins, and Archie and company go all over the place trying to hunt down this mother and have a possible 148 women. I do think the titular mother hunt is a bit too much. It takes up a lot of time and doesn't really let the murder take hold. Which is not necessarily a bad thing, and it's not like the mother hunt itself is irrelevant to the plot, but I did tire of it pretty quickly. And Wolfe is not himself in this book either. He's uncharacteristically angry at Archie and others, and now he does often get like upset with people. He's more like cranky than outright like furious. And he even leaves the house at one point in this novel. But Archie and Inspector Kramer are very much themselves. I actually think there's an argument for the Mother Hunt being lower on the list, but I have it here because I think there are clever aspects to the plot and a lot of interesting twists and development which was enough to place it here at number 26. At number 25 is sort of the companion title to the Mother Hunt, The Father Hunt. Rex Stout loved reusing, title themes quite a bit, as you can see. This is a sort of familiar, similar plot to the Mother Hunt, but much better executed, I would say. Wolfe's client is Amy DeNovo, whose mother recently passed in a hit and run, and she wants to find information about her father. Amy knows nothing about her father and barely anything about her mother, which is really odd. The plot of this book reminds me a lot of Nemesis by Agatha Christie. Not the actual plot itself, but in the execution. It's a perfectly intriguing and enjoyable story, but once you start picking at it, the whole thing sort of comes apart. A lot of the setup doesn't really make sense. Like, how does this adult woman know nothing about her mother, who she's not even like estranged from? And the mother doesn't even have photos taken of her. It's 1968, folks. It just feels a lot of convenient things happen in regards to the setup. But the reason why I have this high is because the ending is good. Convenience and coincidence in the setup is much more tolerable than in the conclusion, which I would find unacceptable. This book is good. It's not top quality at all, but it comes in at number 25. At number 24 is the second book in the series, and this may be a controversial pick, but I have The League of Frightened Men, also called The Frightened Men. And this, again, another novel generally considered one of Rex Stout's best, and I don't possess any qualms with the actual plot of the story involving this group of men who fear for their lives, and I think the mystery plays out in a very interesting and solid way. I don't have any issues with that. My issue, and this isn't a big of a problem as with other previous novels I've talked about, but there are a lot of men in this League of Frightened Men, and they are near indistinguishable from each other. It's not like they blend together as one, but there are a lot of characters, and none of them pop out. It causes me to mix them all up, and some of these people, they come in early on, they play a big role, then they fall into the background, and then other people who are just background characters come forward. It's so easy to confuse who is who. And there's also some early installment weirdness here that feels strange, once you're familiar with the main canon. But, I think the ending is fantastic. I think the murder plot wraps up beautifully. It's very clever, and I like how Wolfe was nearly willing to let a murderer go because the group was trying to withhold his fee. You never want to mess around with Nero Wolfe's money. And there are a lot of positives to this book, but the lack of unique characters just hampered The League of Frightened Men for me. And that's one of my big pet peeves, when all these characters just sort of blend together and you can't distinguish who is who. And while other people might not have a big problem with that, I do. So I have this book here at number 24. At number 23, a novel that starts off great and kind of peters off towards the end, and that is If Death Ever Slept. And this book starts off great with Archie and Wolfe having another argument, to which Archie basically quits once again, but he does take something of an undercover job investigating one Susan Jarrell, who is the daughter-in-law of Otis Jarrell, and this is a typical look into my in-law, who I believe is a scoundrel client. The beginning is full of very fun character moments for Archie, not least of which is his hatred of Ori Cather, who is taking over Archie's position as Wolfe's live-in, which causes Archie to seethe in hatred, and he's constantly throwing digs at Ori in this book, even though Ori himself isn't that big of a presence. But the plot again here is very strong. The mystery is good. I think this book has a lot of good character work beyond the recurring characters. If you only read Stout's Nero Wolfe novels, this book introduces you to a rare female private detective, Doll Bonner, who previously had her own novel and appears in a few other novels and a few of the novellas as well. Rex Stout always included a lot of like political and social issues into his works, and this one also does that, but it's slightly more subtle than usual. Gender dynamics are heavily involved in this one. There's a lot of like chauvinistic words thrown Susan's way, and despite everything that happens in this book, Wolfe still refuses to engage in all of that petty nonsense. This book is pretty strong, but this is the part of the list where I had to get a bit nitpicky. I have my clear so many at the top and my clear so many at the bottom, and the middle, is usually pretty dicey. And unfortunately, I just feel like If Death Ever Slept kind of like fizzles out as it goes on, and so I had to put it here. Something had to go in this part of the list. It's not bad by any means, but I did have it here at number 23. At number 22, we have one of Stout's mystery novels about books, Murder by the Book. And this novel has a few deaths pretty early on in like really quick succession. Wolfe's client here is a Mr. Wellman, whose daughter Joan was killed in a hit and run. I will say one of my like largest criticisms of Rex Stout as a whole is just how many hit and run murders there are in his books. First of all, I just don't find automobile accidents interesting in a murder mystery. I mean, so they're technically not accidents, and it seems extremely implausible just like how many hit and run murders there are, and these are targeted murders, not accidents, just go unwitnessed on busy Manhattan streets. Rex Stout uses them a lot to the point of overuse. And Joan worked for a publishing company and a literary agency, and this leads to a lot of intrigue involving this author and a missing manuscript, and this book serves as a vehicle for Rex Stout to air his complaints about the publishing industry. Stout was president of a few different writers groups, and he hated dealing with like industry insiders and all the red tape and like critique from editors and literary companies who he thought didn't know much about literature. And and he does have a point. Even 70ish years ago, I think it's probably even more so today. I think Rex Stout probably would have given up writing if he was writing today. And unfortunately for Murder by the Book, despite this being a strong novel, there is another novel that does very similar things that is much better than this one. So this one kind of gets lost in the shuffle from just like a pure comparison's sake. I just felt Archie and Wolfe and the rest of the gang didn't have as many fun character moments as they normally do. Inspector Kramer was pretty good, though, as he actually had to go to Wolfe for help and beg, which is something that he, quite frankly, should have done more often. So that knocked Murder by the Book down a little bit here to number 22. At number 21 is a novel that marks a symbolic turning point for Nero Wolfe, and that is Over My Dead Body. And this is the first book chronologically where Stout heavily explores, his criticisms of the FBI. The FBI are portrayed as absolute dolts in this book, and Stout spares never a kind word towards the agency. This book was published in 1940, and Stout was growing frustrated with a lot of FBI actions like invading people's privacy and skirting around constitutional restrictions. This is before the FBI really started targeting Stout, but I have no doubts this book started it all. The FBI was run by J. Edgar Hoover, who would later become one of Stout's mortal enemies, and Stout often goes out of his way to ding Hoover in really nasty, petty ways. But the plot here involves Wolfe's native Montenegro and introduces his estranged daughter, his adopted daughter, Carla. I remember the first time I read this book, and I just found all of this new background information from Wolfe to be very strange and coming out of nowhere. And while this is all firmly established canon, later on, and part of Nero Wolfe's character, it just felt very odd to me at the time, and I've never been able to shake that feeling that something is off with this book. But this book is very important as it establishes Wolfe's background. There's a lot of good character moments as well. I love the murder, which takes place at a fencing gym, and Archie winds up getting framed for that, because of course he did. And the ending to me is just very funny. It's cheesy, but Wolfe actually winds up killing the murderer by cracking a beer bottle over their head, which is like, how did that even succeed? But it is a characteristic moment of Wolfe being very petty when someone pisses him off. But it's just this like odd feeling I have this book that prevents me from putting it any higher, delightful as it is. So it comes in here at number 21. At number 20, another book that features some hit and runs, and that is The Golden Spiders. Again, this is typically pretty high on Nero Wolfe rankings. I have it like semi low. This is still below the halfway point, but we have a good opening as we normally do in these books. These books almost always open spectacularly. Wolfe's client here is a very young boy named Pete who claims he witnessed a hit and run murder only for himself to fall victim to the same fate. And Wolfe is particularly an ass in this one as he refuses Pete's mother's request because the fee isn't large enough. Pete saved up $4.30, and that's not enough for Wolfe to get involved, but Archie does, and that leads to another hit and run. I think the story is good. I don't necessarily find the ending to be like the most interesting in the way it's wrapped up. I don't mean the actual solution, but just the manner in which it is solved. It's just fine. It lacks a spark, and I think that describes this book as a whole for me. It lacks that spark, those big fun moments, despite it being a very good novel throughout. So I have it here at number 20. At number 19, I finally have the other Arnold Zeck novel, And Be a Villain, also called More Deaths Than One, which specifically is 3 deaths. And I considered putting this one much higher. The plot is fantastic. A guest on a radio program is murdered on air after drinking poisoned soda that may have meant for the show's host, Madeline Fraser. And I love the plot of this book. It's one of Rex Stout's best. Now, the solution utilizes a very common trope in mystery novels. I won't say which one, but it's not like it's particularly obvious here. Usually I can sniff this one out pretty easily, but Rex Stout here, and usually does, do a good job of burying the murderer. What holds this book back is, again, it's Arnold Zeck, this criminal mastermind who keeps calling Wolfe and warns him not to get involved, and just like hangs over the story for no reason. The plot doesn't need it, and I will say it's much less of an issue here than in Zeck's other appearances, but it still like lingers over it, and it's a shame because the mystery is excellent. There's a lot of good Wolfe and Archie content. Wolfe actually seeks out clients in this book, which he never does, because his income tax bill was through the roof. And if you think the Queens of Crime complained a lot about taxes, you should just read Rex Stout. Lots of tax complaints from him. And when looking at the novels, about like And Be a Villain, they just don't have this major issue of Arnold Zeck really ruining the novel. The next few don't necessarily have better plots, but they aren't hampered either. And this book really should be, like 6, 7, 8, maybe even more spots higher. But, I just hate Arnold Zeck so much. And I know people feel differently about that. But, for me, it's really just feels like something added for no reason. And it just like ruins the plot. So I have And Be a Villain here at number 19. At number 18 is a novel that I forgot even existed until I did my reread. So I feel like this middle of the list here feels perfect for it, and that is Gambit. And I think Gambit is like one of those novels that may be off-putting at first glance. It has a very heavy chess theme, and I'm not a fan of chess. I don't play chess, but this is sort of like cards on the table in the sense that you don't need to know the game to enjoy or understand the mystery. And this is a fantastic mystery. It's very complex, but in a way that's easy to follow and is credible. There are a lot of moving parts and good character work. This book contains one of my favorite scenes in any Nero Wolfe novel, and it's a pretty iconic one that gets brought up a lot in Nero Wolfe discussions, where Wolfe burns out pages of a dictionary because he doesn't like the definitions it uses for imply and infer, which I always find funny. And that moment encapsulates pretty much everything you need to know about Nero Wolfe. I don't have a lot of criticism of Gambit. It's just that I enjoy the other books a little more, and this one doesn't stand out in the grand scheme of things. This is the part of the list where it's difficult to make selections. If you had asked me where I thought Gambit would rank before I made this list, I would have said like 11 or 12, but there are a lot of novels competing for these same spots, and something has to go here, so it's Gambit at number 18. At number 17, the final novel for this video is another book sort of in the same position as Gambit, Please Pass the Guilt, the penultimate Nero Wolfe novel. Rex Stout never loses a step. He was well over 80 when he wrote this book, and his quality never deteriorated. I still think his best era of novels is earlier on, but he never loses steam, and I did notice the books get shorter in length as he got older, which is understandable. And this novel involves a bombing murder and some other mysterious pieces of intrigue. Bombing is again, fall into that category of murder methods I don't particularly find interesting alongside hit and runs. I think it limits like who the culprit could be, and there usually isn't any interesting sort of trick with the mechanics. But this one is the exception to the rule. The mechanics here are excellent, with this being a case of possible mistaken identity of the victim. Stout is also always toying with our assumptions. He doesn't often go the way we think most authors would, nor does he ever really pull off some kind of like grand dramatic twist. There are twists, but they're usually more subtle and more, less for the bombastic, twist. He just has the good story, and that's what he has here. But again, Please Pass the Guilt is a very strong title, but just like one of those ones that I sort of don't really think about, which is why I sort of delegated it to this tier of the list with good novels, but not the ones that are my favorites. So I had to put it here at number 17. And that is it for this video. Let me know in the comments what you think about this bottom half of the list and what you think could be the number one ranked Nero Wolfe novel next week. And again, next week, of course, is the final half of this list, the top 16 Nero Wolfe novels written by Rex Stout. And don't forget, I'm also taking, if you have any suggestions for future videos, please drop that in the comments below. I'm very open to viewer ideas. And if you have suggested in the past, and I have not done the video, suggest it again, because sometimes I lose my recordings of these things. So I don't want to miss any requests that you have. And until next time, Mystery Files.